back in the day, you used to see founders who tried to act like Steve Jobs, right? They wore black turtlenecks and they wrote brusque emails and they basically acted like assholes. And somehow their company didn't succeed, right? And the problem that they had was they were acting like Steve Jobs, but they weren't Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was a singular genius. I would argue Brian Chesky is one of the greatest founders of his generation of founders, right?
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode. Industry insiders having frank debates about the latest tech, politics, and business news. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into how current events connect to broader themes and trends that impact your startup, your investments, and your day-to-day operational decisions. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
I'm Amir Shevat.
And I'm Emil Michael.
That's right. Yaniv is back with us this week. He's graced us with his presence, taking a vacation from his vacation. Welcome back, Yaniv.
Great to be back, Chris. This is actually evening time, my time in Berlin. So I'm not sure if all of you know, Emil often has a glass of red wine when we do React. So I thought I'd copy him, and I'm having a lovely German lager. But actually, I've kind of missed doing this. So I'm really happy to be back for this week.
Before the recording started, he was like, "Oh, Chris, I missed you so much." And then Emil joined. He's like, "Emil, I've missed you."
I missed you all. As you, dear listeners, I'm sure have missed me.
Absolutely, we have indeed. Welcome back for at least one episode every now and then. Yaniv, it's great to have you. And on this show, we're going to talk about founder mode. Brian Chesky has been talking to Y Combinator, has been talking to Jason Calacanis, he's been talking to anyone who'll listen about the way he's re-architected and reorganized Airbnb to be much more agile and nimble. And he calls it founder mode. How is it different than the way you're running your company? And how could it be a superpower to be less incremental, bolder, and move quickly and beat your competition? Stay tuned for all of that. We're also talking about X being banned in Brazil. And did they really freeze SpaceX's assets as a punitive response to X's content? We'll talk about that and talk about Elon Musk's increasing power as a non-state actor. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the next Apple event happening this coming week. The new iPhone. Does anyone really care? Are we expecting anything really meaningfully new? And how might it change the landscape for hardware and AI moving forward? All that and much, much more on this week's show. Stay tuned right after the break.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. Okay, Chris, we've got to talk about the Startup Podcast Pact. Every time somebody writes a nice thing about us on LinkedIn, writes a review on Apple Podcasts, it makes me so happy. And the reason it makes me happy is, yes, it's a salve on my ego, but also it helps more founders find us. And that is the reason we do this show. The only thing we ask of you, dear listener, to listen to this free resource, please follow us, write a shout out for us on LinkedIn, and give us a review or a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever it is that you listen to us. It helps more people find the show, helps us find the best guests, and to keep doing what we're doing. All right, let's jump right in.
All right. For our first topic, we wanted to talk about Brian Chesky having spoken at YC about what he calls founder mode. Now, Brian, if you don't know, is the CEO and founder of Airbnb. Towards the beginning of this year, did this big move where he fired all the product managers and took direct control of the company. And he gave a talk about this recently where he explained why. And he called it founder mode. And Paul Graham described it as, one of the more interesting, actually not just Paul Graham, but a lot of the YC founders and other people that were hanging around said it is one of the most interesting talks they've heard in a long time. And the idea was, as a founder, you're often given the advice when you're scaling up to turn into a manager, to start delegating to other people and build a big boy company. And he's saying that works for managers. It works for hired guns, hired CEOs, but it doesn't work if you're a founder. As a founder, you have that mandate, Yaniv, that you and I have talked about to move the company like a speedboat, and that you should maintain more direct control over the company really indefinitely. And then one final data point here is Jensen Huang has sort of suggested the same thing. He has like 60 direct reports over at NVIDIA. And so what do you guys make of this idea of companies as they scale up and they're still run by founders need to flatten their org and get more direct control and maybe even be accused of micromanaging rather than empowering their orgs, keeping that founder agility and DNA at all levels? What do we think about this? Is this a thing that just works for him and a few elite founders? Or is this the way all founders should be thinking about their companies as they scale up? Emil, you're one of the only ones here who've actually run a major company that is scaling up. So how do you think about this?
A founder has a few things over sort of a professional manager. And I don't think they're not overcomable, but they're sort of come with the job, if you will. One is they usually own a lot more of the company. So they're like just more in it. Number two, because they've, by definition, been with the company for a long time, they just have more history with it. And because they founded it, they were with it when it was a chaotic thing that was nothing. When times come that are difficult for a company like Airbnb or whatever, they tend to have more incentive, more history, and more moral authority to be able to make harder changes than a professional manager might. Professional manager may be subject to, well, they were hired by the board or they came in and just have less tenure, less experience, and less of this sort of battle scars, if you will. So that distinction, and then other counterexamples, Satya at Microsoft, Tim Cook at Apple, who've sort of acted like founders and been able to change the companies in pretty dramatic ways. Yes. So I don't think this is a binary, but it's a concept, and I think the concept's right.
So I agree to some extent, but I've seen examples of founders who are able to scale to a big company. And the biggest example that I've seen is Jeff Bezos. And the way he did it is to have company culture and processes that prevent the stagnation that you see with a lot of guns for hire. It's very common to see hard choices being made all the time in Amazon and having like PMs close businesses, open businesses, make very hard choices that you don't see in other big companies. And I think it's a matter of culture. If you build your company in a way where your PMs know how you think and know how to build a company, and they basically are, it's called single-threaded owners in Amazon. So if they actually own a certain business, they will act as founders. If you hire guns for hire who just want to do run-of-the-mill business, they will do run-of-the-mill business. So I think if you want to build this yourself and manage every aspect of the company, you need to be a super founder. But you don't have to be a super founder if you build your company right.
Actually, Amir, that's perfect for what I was going to say. That term super founder that you used. And, often back in the day, you used to see founders who tried to act like Steve Jobs, right? They wore black turtlenecks and they wrote brusque emails and they basically acted like assholes. And somehow their company didn't succeed, right? And the problem that they had was they were acting like Steve Jobs, but they weren't Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was a singular genius. I would argue Brian Chesky is one of the greatest founders of his generation of founders, right? And something that I've seen happen just as a sort of counterpoint is founders who hang on in founder mode too long beyond their capability. And I've told the story on this podcast before. I was at Google in 2006 when Larry and Sergey were still trying to be in founder mode and failing and flailing and, honestly kind of embarrassing themselves because everyone was just trying to basically work around the fact that these guys were trying to micromanage without the context, without the subtlety that they needed to, right? And that can happen really badly, right? When you've got a scaling company, if it doesn't have the strength to actually be able to scale effectively, that's when things get really, really bad. And, again, Google at one point basically didn't believe in management. And I think at one point, Bill Corrin was the head of engineering back in the early days. He had 160 direct reports. So you can imagine how much love he gave them. And I knew some of those people. They hated reporting to him because they're like, I have no manager and I don't know what I'm doing. And so I think it is through that sheer force of will, that sheer...
We're talking about two separate things.
Genius that allows some of these people to overcome that.
I think we're talking about two separate things, right? Does any big company need professional management when it gets big? Of course. I don't think that's what Chesky was saying, was it?
He was halfway saying that.
Yeah, so I was watching an interview with him about this, right? What he's also saying paired up with this is that the company shouldn't be doing anything that he personally can't manage. So his time and his scalability is the governor in terms of the number of things they do. And he wants to do fewer things better.
Yeah.
And so this is a Steve Jobsian Apple approach to say, we don't need to do all the things. We just need to do what we do better. And so the question of like, as you scale up, the question is, what does scale mean and how far do you scale? And his argument is, I don't need us to be doing a massive and ever-growing portfolio of crap. I only want to do enough small things really, really well. I want to avoid the incrementalism, the bureaucracy, the slowness, the mediocrity. And I want to leverage my founders' superpowers for as long as possible. Where I do disagree, I think we've hit on something really clever here, and I want to unpack it a little bit more, which is, it's not so much just founders. I think founders get this authority by default. But I think it was you, Amir, who said, you can also act like a founder, even if you were hired in, even if you're a manager. And I think too many managers are incrementalists. They just look at their OKRs, they go home. Emil, I took to heart the cultural value at Uber of be an owner, not a renter, because I came in as a founder. I'm a multi-time founder. I didn't know how to be an executive at a big company. And when someone said to me, oh, no, you're the CEO of your thing and you're an owner, not a renter, and go do your thing. And I was like, I can do that. I know how to do that. And so there are companies I help now, and I'm like, I'm acting like the founder. I don't give a shit if I am the founder. If you've asked me to be the founder, I am here to make big changes. And I think that's something that impactful leaders, whether they're founders or not, should be striving for.
But Chris, this is what's interesting in what Brian Chesky is saying, is it's the exact opposite of that. If I understand it correctly, he's saying, there's that old saying, which is actually attributed to Steve Jobs, hire smart people and give them space to do their jobs, right? Don't tell them what to do. He's saying, no, I don't want all of these people to act like mini founders. Their job is to do what I, Brian Chesky, tells them to do, because I have the overall vision. I want to create this great product, and I'm sick of letting other people's inferior judgment and lack of context compromise my product that I understand better than anybody else.
Yeah, no, you're right. What I'm saying is, if you're not led by Brian Chesky and you don't have a CEO doing that, you who are listening to this show could be a founder-like middle manager and run your org with a level of agility and boldness of a founder, even if you're not the CEO. But I actually think the answer is ultimately a hybrid, right? So I really like, again, not to keep over-referencing Uber, but the company was designed as little mini CEOs with a lot of autonomy. But Travis would get in there and go, these 5 things are very important, and I'm going to be all over them. I'm going to have the eye of Sauron on them, and I'm going to untangle these things and make sure my judgment is pressed on them. And I think that's a huge advantage. And that's my own management style, actually, is like, I set up a huge org at a large scale up with a very empowered product managers, but there is a central vision, a central thrust, a central theme, and regular alignment and opportunities for me to jump in with judgment and go, guys, you're being too incremental there. You're not aligned there. You're not doing this here. You need to be bolder, better, smarter, faster. And I think it ends up being you have to do both. It's a hybrid.
And I would say that, like, if you say it's only my vision, you're not building a generational company. You limit the company to your capabilities. And I think it's a shortcoming of you being able to build a good culture and hire amazing people. So I think, like, hey, like, F everybody, it's now going to be my show, is more of a signal for failure for doing the right thing and building a scalable, healthy, generational company. It's like, okay, everybody's vision is wrong. Let me dive into my vision and I'll tell you how it's done. It's a little bit like with kids. Like, kids will tell you they can do their own stuff and you can tell them what to do. It's much better when they do their own stuff and do the right thing.
It's not so much, I think, Amir, that their vision is wrong. It's the old, we had a whole episode on alignment, right? And if you imagine a big boulder and everyone's got ropes on this boulder and they're trying to pull it. Everybody may have a vision, but each vision is on a different vector. And so that boulder isn't going anywhere. And so having someone with a crystal clear vision of how everybody needs to get aligned and to actually pull that, to make progress on that boulder, I think is really important. So a clear, consistent vision from the top, not necessarily that it's better, but that it's driving alignment, is very, very powerful. And I'm starting to believe that one of the most important things at a large company is alignment, especially when you have precious little resources and precious little time.
What I was going to say is, I think that is fine if the founder is a true visionary. And, again, going back to my points about Steve Jobs, I've said before, learning from exceptional people is a mistake because by definition, they are exceptional. They are the exception. And a lot of what made them successful is probably not something that you can simply replicate by copying their habits or way of working. And so, yes, if you are trying to build, first of all, a very strong product company, and Amir, you made this point, right? Like you have Airbnb is one product. Apple, one of the things Steve Jobs did when he came back in from the cold is he cut most of the product lines. Apple to this day has a pretty narrow set of product lines. So if you have an exceptional vision for a small set of products that you can fit in one person's head, and that person is a genuine visionary, that can be amazing. But assume that's not you, unless you have strong evidence that you are a generational visionary, one of the best in the world. That's probably not you. And I think it's a mistake. Micromanagement is when you do that and you don't have a good vision, right? And then people, are not happy.
That's like, creepy is when you hit on somebody and then you're not attractive.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like micromanagers when you,
It's very true. It's very insightful. I think I can tell you where it actually worked when I was a product leader. Like when I had vision that was clearly articulating a lot of the decisions that I was making. Like in Google, it was do no evil. So we actually made a lot of decisions because of that. In Slack, it was make work life simpler, more pleasant, and more productive. And that's why we said no to game bots inside Slack. And in Amazon, it was customer obsession. So we always ask ourselves, is this the best thing for the end customer? So once you have these culture things that actually make product managers make the right choice, you get a lot less top leadership procrastination and stuff like that. You get a lot more good decisions being made.
I think there's something you can pick apart this founder mode thing, and everyone can find something they like and don't like about it. So it's sort of what you take out of it. What I took out of it was not that the founder is the singular person, but the founder mentality. It could be an exec or product manager. It could be others. If you don't have that, that's what could kill a company. And companies that fill up with managers who are pushing paper and doing reviews as their primary methodology for getting to their next bonus or next promotion or whatever are what's the cancer inside of any big company that will kind of kill innovation.
I think that's wise, Emil. The only thing I would say is building incredible businesses is not easy. I think we all know that. And we're actually navigating between these two rocks that you can wreck your ship on, right? One is you create this layer of professional managers who are all about cover your ass and design by committee and promotion-driven development on the one side. And on the other side, you have the founder, megalomaniac micromanager who doesn't take any advice and doesn't build a scalable culture and organization. And the path through these two rocky outcroppings is pretty narrow. But you need to sort of avoid both of them.
Yeah, but remember this. The VC industry is designed to find the one winner out of 10. So
That's right.
yes, of course, the entrepreneurs are going to be like, well, I'm going to try to be the one because everything else sucks.
That's right.
So they imitate for the best case. So yes, is that good advice for everyone? No, but it's sort of the reason a lot of these founders got into the business, and most of them will never be that.
That's a good point.
So just a couple of final thoughts and we'll move on. You might say this is Brian's failure as an org builder. And so he is having to resort back to, small startup founder mode. One could argue that. I'm not arguing it necessarily. But in my experience, Yaniv, you talk about the threading the two sides. In my experience, scale-ups and large companies are suffering from people who are not moving fast enough, who lack vision, who lack clear opinions, and who are lacking alignment. They're not suffering from people who are megalomaniacs, who are too opinionated, who are breaking everything, or are, maybe they're micromanaging, but they're not micromanaging to a vision. And so I think this is actually good advice from Brian generally, is that for the most part, most mediocre companies, which is most of them, are not moving fast enough, don't have clear enough vision, don't have opinionated enough people, and not driving enough alignment. And so I think there's a lot to learn here for people listening. If you're not going to adopt founder mode fully, at least get a flavor of founder mode added to your company, because chances are you need more of it.
Sorry, could I synthesize all this? Because I don't know if it's just a delightful German beer, Buble, by the way, talking, or if some penny dropped for me. But I think synthesizing all the things we're saying, it's, first of all, you cannot have a successful company if there isn't a vision, and that vision is not disseminated through the organization. Now, there are two ways to disseminate that vision, right? One of it is through culture, through having a clear set of priorities that you communicate well, clear incentives that keep people aligned, right? You're a magnet. Everyone stays aligned. The other is brute force. The founder goes in there and fucking aligns everyone themselves. They're moving the iron filings. They're keeping them aligned one way or the other. But you have to start with a vision, and then you have to think, what is my tactic for aligning people to that vision? And if you don't have that, you will never be that incredible product company.
Very, very well said, Yaniv. That was brilliant.
Thank the Olgoya Beer House.
Yeah, we should do product placement now also.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If, like, the point is, you must drive alignment, speed, agility, and vision.
Yep.
Pick your tactic, but you better bloody do it. And Brian's not great at building orgs and hiring high-quality people and disseminating vision and setting incentives, apparently. So he went and did it brute force. And that's not a ding against him. That's playing to his strengths. I think that's excellent. That's really great. Let's move on to topic number 2. Again, we have like Elon watch on this show. It seems like we're stalking him at this point. The news just came out that a judge has banned X in Brazil, and it's now, I think, going to the Supreme Court to see if that ban holds. And of course, the Brazilian government, as part of this ban, is saying, well, Starlink, another Elon company, or rather another Elon business within SpaceX, is still providing access to X within Brazil. And so Brazil is like, hey, you better enforce this ban with your internet service provider. And Elon's saying some version of fuck you unless and until you unfreeze X's assets in Brazil. So Brazil's using the courts and regulation and laws to, I guess not blackmail, but control Elon's businesses there. And Elon is using his multiple strategic companies and assets and power, which we've talked about many times on this show, to say a version of fuck you back, unless you moderate what you're asking me to do in this way or that way. I'd love for us to continue to have this debate, because at the end of the last episode, Amir and I talked about Elon's increasing strategic hard power. So not kind of soft power with like Mark Zuckerberg's algorithms, but hard power, rockets and satellites and controlling the conversation. This is an example of this, of saying to government, hey, screw you, I can deliver my version of the internet into your population unless and until you change your policies or unfreeze my assets. What do we think about this? Emil, you're, I think, the contrarian here about, you've got much more sympathy for his positions typically. What's your thoughts on this?
I'm totally aghast that Brazil, which is one of the world's biggest democracies, would be organized. I don't know enough about it to be like 100% certain. It's such that one person can, by discretion, shut down an information service for a whole country, which seems to have happened. And that judge, if you read historically, has been very aligned with the current party in power, and when the other party was in power, was sort of acting much more politically, them trying to cross assets and do whatever. I think it's a dangerous game, because my understanding is that the Brazilian military relies on Starlink to some degree. So this really set up a very dangerous clash of like, ugh.
Yeah. This is what I'm saying, right? Like the FTC or whatever can't really say this, some things to Elon. And he's like, well, you need my Starlink in Ukraine. What are you going to do about it? Right? Like this is serious geopolitical strategy, right?
The last point I make is just that there are laws where Elon said, okay, in Germany, they have laws specific that have been on the books for decades about the Holocaust. And he follows the takedowns on those because they've been adjudicated. They're like well established in the law. That's how they view speech as having a limitation on this subject. But this one seemed to not be as adjudicated. So that's why I'm more skeptical that this was done without malice by the government in Brazil.
So first of all, I'm happy to some extent about this because everybody's moving to Blue Sky, and I'm an investor in Blue Sky. So we're seeing a lot of growth there. and a lot of happy Brazilians using an actual public conversation with open APIs and open standard behind it. So if we're talking about product placement, that's a good pop to put. Second of all, my read is that Elon thinks he owns a country, and he thinks that he has the same power as any other country. And to some extent, he's growing in power, but I think this is going to be an interesting example of a country has an army, and Elon does not have an army. If Brazil actually decides to enforce a law in Brazil, they could use police force, they could use army, and I don't think Elon will have anything to say about it. At a different level, there was a presentation, like a long tweet in Blue Sky about Brazilians and how they think about this. And what they said is that Americans thinks that free speech is the top freedom. And what they said is like not being thrown out of an airplane because you said the wrong thing is the freedom. They want the current government because they don't want martial law, because they don't want the army to own the country. And this is a risky business for non-government companies to get involved in internal politics. So there's a lot of complexities that I think the American people, and I think Elon do not understand about Brazilian politics, and playing basically God mode in a country that you don't understand, that you think follows the American rule, is a dangerous business.
I think to Emil's prior point, and I think this is what Chris is setting up here, is the fact that Elon does have some of this hard power. And you're right, of course, Amir, that ultimately, how are all laws enforced? If you sort of peel back enough layers, it is the threat of violence through the military, right? Which typically the governments have a monopoly on. With Elon controlling assets like Starlink that the militaries of these countries rely upon, he starts to get some of that hard power that traditionally is the preserve of nation states. And he's showing that he's willing to use it in a certain extent here by saying that, he is entangling SpaceX and the services it offers with this ban on X. And so it's an interesting world, right? Like he is acting in some ways like a state actor here.
So it's a very dangerous move because the army could side with him. And we've seen what happens in South America when the army decides to take over a country, because then people start falling off airplanes and shooting themselves in the back of the head. So this is very dangerous steps that he's taking, siding with a power that is unstable and not super 100% democratic like he's used to in the States.
Wait, but hold on. The judge shut down Twitter, told Brazilians they get fined $9,000 a day if they use the VPN, froze the Starlink bank accounts. So by right, he has to say, okay, you're not paying me, Starlink off. Like, what do you, he didn't bring Starlink into it, they did.
Well, is that correct?
So it's not like he was threatening. Yes.
Is it the Starlink bank accounts that they've frozen, or is it the X?
Yes, it was the Starlink bank accounts, and that was part of the thing, is that this judge was saying, like, well, because Elon owns both, and he has removed his legal representative from the country because he didn't want them to be arrested, shut down his office, so Twitter has no office there now.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. That's ridiculous. I think in the past, Elon has been guilty of conflating these separate corporate entities that have different ownership structures in that way. And I've always been critical of that. And so I think when Brazil has done the same thing,
that's
freezing Starlink's assets when Starlink has done nothing wrong, I don't think that's
I agree.
And
right.
so he didn't threaten it. So this is the point, is like, they did. And so far, he hasn't even said, like, I'll stop the service. He's like, fine, freeze the bank accounts. He hasn't, like, made the next move, which it would be his right to say, okay, you're freezing my assets in the country for Starlink. I guess I'm not providing Starlink to the country.
That's 100% legit. And I think we might have set the entire conversation on maybe wrong premise, but I think, like, again, I stand behind what I'm saying. Like, when billionaires play in U.S. democracy, it's different when they're playing in other democracies, weaker democracies. And as people have a lot of power, they need to be very mindful, at least like from my reading of what that Brazilian doctor said on Blue Sky, they're fearful of external involvement that will, like, digress the country to an unhealthy place.
So let me actually read this. You're right. I think that the premise here, we're gone off on a bit of a tangent. So as part of the feud, the judge ordered the assets of the de facto economic group under Musk's control be frozen to guarantee X pays fines issued by Brazil courts. So Starlink, which is a subsidiary of Musk's aerospace firm SpaceX, of course, has had its assets frozen by Brazil. And now they're saying the order is based on an unfounded determination that Starlink should be responsible for the fines levied unconstitutionally against X. They wrote, "We intend to address this matter legally, that we will not afford due process under Brazilian laws." And they're saying SpaceX and X are two different companies with different shareholders, and the only owns 40% of SpaceX, and that its legal action is basically improper and has no due course. So that's a different story. So
Yep.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Flow Health, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
yeah, I think we've gone off on a bit of a tangent there then. I do think, though, that the scenario that we were responding to incorrectly is not hard to imagine, which is why we all went down that road. And I believe it's actually already occurring in just more subtle ways. So I think that there are regulators in the US who are soft pedaling their actions against Elon because the US military needs Starlink in Ukraine, for example. I do think that is already occurring. There's a chill in the air around him that they cannot enforce the full power of the law against him already. And you can imagine these kind of scenarios playing out that because they're very logical extensions of what's happening already.
I disagree with that in the U.S. in that, like, Kamala Harris has said that, like, he has to suffer consequences. I forget, I can pull up the exact quote. This was way before, because they don't like the information that's on X in the U.S., but obviously they loved it under Jack Dorsey because it was supportive of their regime. I do think it's a more interesting question.
Emil, I really think that's a very reductive take on what it is. I really do. It's not that the Democrats liked it because it was supportive of their regime, which I love the word regime, by the way. I think they liked it because the guy running it was not a raging extremist in his views and was not letting on hate speech and anti-Semitism and all sorts of disgusting stuff.
Mark Zuckerberg wrote a letter to Congress saying he was being forced by the Biden administration to censor topics that were supportive of their policies. It doesn't get much more regimey than that.
Yeah, the topics you're referring to are COVID vaccines.
And the Hunter Biden laptop, whatever it was. I mean, look, I don't want to get rat hole in this point because I don't think it's that interesting. I think what's interesting with this Pavel thing in France also, the U.S. standards for free speech are different than they are elsewhere in the world. So how do U.S. companies, how do they behave? Or not even U.S. companies, like in this case, Telegram's not a U.S. company. What are the rules to follow? You're like, okay, follow the local rules. And you're like, well, it's impossible to moderate 1 billion conversations. Well, like, okay, well, then you're illegal here, even though our citizens rely on it. So then what?
Here's my take. It's very subtle and nuanced, okay? By default, companies should follow the laws of the local country that they're in. However, a number of countries have unjust laws. And is it possible and maybe valuable or ultimate form of justice for internet companies, irrespective of where they're from, to sort of impose a meta law, a meta principle about free speech, and to kind of circumvent those laws to empower dissidents and empower social movements? I think so, to a degree. And I think that's what we talked about last episode with, Telegram serving ultimately a net good. But at the same time, when the people who own those companies are showing a carelessness, a callousness, or a hypocrisy about those principles, people question the motives and motivations of, well, yeah, free speech is good, but you are also banning people and acting kind of petulantly and putting your thumb on the scale for what is ostensibly supposed to be an open conversation on an open platform. And so these things like trump each other. It's like the laws should be upheld unless and until the laws are unjust, in which case the internet culture is this great global infrastructure that can subvert authoritarian tendencies. But then that's subverted by, yes, but the people running them need to be believed to have great principles in and of themselves. And Musk breaks that third layer. And I think that's why people have less tolerance for his bullshit.
I think, Chris, like the argument you're trying to make is not tenable, right? Because what you're saying is in some way we want companies to decide what laws they will follow and what laws they won't follow, depending on whether we like them or not. And, I just think that...
I know.
It's not...
I know. It is...
like, that's not a thing.
No, I understand, but that you have to... There's a meta layer here, which is just because it's a law doesn't mean that it's moral or ethical, and that any country powered by a dictatorship can pass any bloody law they want. And so there is this kind of meta principles that American companies or the Western philosophy has around speech and due process and what have you, that yes, it's messy, and these are kind of super state actors or extra state actors. And yeah, that is a bloody messy situation, but that's the world we live in, that these tech CEOs are more powerful than nation states in many ways. And that sucks. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm saying it's, in some cases, we're willing to tolerate it for some kind of sense of higher level principles, I think. I think we would be more willing to tolerate it if it wasn't Elon Musk. That's what I'm saying.
Well, who's the we, right? Like even between the four of us, I don't think we get agreement on that statement. And that is the point.
Let me give you an example. I think we are more eager and willing to support the Telegram CEO because we don't know of his personality and politics than we are Elon Musk because we know some of the careless and hurtful things he's said and done. And so I think, last episode we were defending the Telegram CEO and we are not defending Elon Musk's Brazilian actions, right?
I think it's we fall into the bias of do we like the guy or not.
That's what I'm saying.
That's my point.
At the end of the day, this is a threat on democracy because like your leaders were elected by you and they call the shots. It's all a question of who calls the shots. If the government calls the shots, then it's a democracy. If somebody who is not elected...
Sorry, Amir, it's not if the government calls the shot, it's a democracy. If the people call the shots and they've elected a government and then the government... That's what I'm saying is that...
By reference, so there's like there's the European Switzerland direct calling the shots and there's the US representative of calling the shots. But like if you are opting in for democracy, you're saying the elected people are the top and they make the rules. And if that is not the case, and if they can't tell a company what to do, then that company is calling the shot. And that company has not been elected by people. So whether we like the person at the top of the company or we don't, if we choose a CEO, we choose a different government system.
So let me ask you, Amir, in Venezuela, where Maduro thinks Elon is his number one enemy, the number one reason he lost the election, is that something that like, oh yeah, Elon should have just like banned Twitter, just like Maduro wanted in Venezuela?
So my answer is, if I'm a true democracy person, is like, the answer is yes, they should do whatever the government is saying, and the people should choose a better government or revolt.
But they tried. The point was of X in Venezuela is they were trying.
So we're now going into like even a deeper rabbit hole of like,
no, but I'm trying to test your limits. You must have a limit where you're like, you know what, in that case, you're right. Like,
yeah,
okay, I can tell you my answer to that, Emil, is that I think to a certain extent, companies are in a position where they can take a stand, but they might also have to face the consequences, right? They might have executives arrested in that country for breaking the law in that country. That's just how it is, right? So yeah, all of this stuff is complex. And I think operating in countries where the political situation is suboptimal, or in the case of Venezuela, extremely suboptimal, has a lot of moral complexity to it. I agree with that. But ultimately, the law, it's there.
That's what I'm saying, is that there is a real complexity here, because Amir, you and I last episode were very clearly like saying Telegram is not moderating their conversations in France, and France as a democracy has decided to arrest the CEO. And we believe that that's overreach because this is a private communication platform.
But we both said it's okay to block Telegram in France. So I think governments could do that.
They can block it, yes. But that's what they're doing to X, right? The X has basically told them, get fucked. and so they're blocking it, and they're using whatever means they can.
I think that's okay.
It's
In both cases.
it's okay, but we're cheering on the CEO of Telegram, and we are.
I mean, I'm not.
We are equivocating. Well, you haven't.
And it's worse, Amir, because a judge in Brazil said, not only are we shutting down X, but I'm going to fine my own citizens $9,000 a day for evading that ban. I am not allowing them to choose what to hear.
Emil, I'm not siding with that government. I'm saying I come from a country where I disagree with the government for the last 16 years. But I still
But you are siding with the government in the Brazil case if they're also punishing the citizens for they're not allowed to say, I want to hear this.
But if you ask a libertarian, both sides, both Democratic and Republican, are punishing citizens in the US by taking taxes. You can have a lot of opinions on government, but at the end of the day, both sides agree how the rules are played. You choose a government. If that government is shitty, you replace that government. And if you have a judge that is bad, the government should replace that judge. I'm saying it's okay if I agree or disagree with that judge. The process should be due process. Choose a good government. The government should choose good judges. If judges do bad jobs, they should fire them. That's how the game
they
is
should.
played.
But what if that doesn't happen? Are you judging whether the due process is due in Venezuela or not due in Brazil?
I think Amir's point is, and it's a very good one, which is, what if that doesn't happen? Well, the answer sort of has to be either tech execs get to override it because they've decided something they liked didn't happen, or they need to sit down and shut the fuck up and let the process run its course. You can't say, well, what if the thing didn't work out the way we liked? Well, our powers combined, we are tech execs, let's go override the outcome of the election. That's not okay.
Yeah, no, but X shut down. X is shut down in Brazil. They won. The judge won. He won.
If the people don't like that decision, and that decision is big enough of an impact to their life, they should choose a different party. And then that party should tell that judge that he is out of the job and revert their decision. That's how governments work. That's how it works in the US. That's how you would like it to work in the US.
So he's already reversing the VPN ban because the citizens are rebelling. And this is the same judge that shut down WhatsApp years ago until there were riots in the street and he had to put it back on.
That's exactly how democracy works.
It's kind of, when it happens that frequently, you wonder what is happening at the top of this government?
Oh, it's definitely broken.
They're so afraid of their own citizens,
It's
Right.
I agree with you. I'm just saying from the process perspective, I don't want to break the process because democracy is a very, very important process. And if we break it by having CEOs choose what we just forfeit democracy. Even because we don't like the outcomes of some decisions, democracy is very, very important. And we should trust the system.
Yeah, it's clear that, with non-state actors like tech billionaires.
Can we stop calling billionaires? Like maybe, you're trying to put a class thing into this.
Tech moguls, powerful tech moguls, with countries' democracies falling into populism and kind of into these weird gray areas. And with, debates about AI and free speech and so on, we're in a very complicated era. And this question of who trumps who, and Trump, it's a very complicated world that we're living in. And it's just to try to put a bow on this is ultimately it's lots of power centers pushing, and we have to hope that the middle holds, that all of these things balance each other out and it lands in a good spot.
I'll finish with one thought. When Trump got elected, Slack had 2 days of bereavement. So people were released from their day to grief about this.
Were they paid also?
Paid grief days. I thought that
that happened. That happened at Uber as well, Emil. I don't know if you remember, but the next day we didn't have grief days, but for the next week, people were like,
it's fine for people to be upset. Right? But finish your story.
I thought that was wrong, because even if I didn't agree with the decision that the people have voted for, I said companies should not have political opinions. They should adhere to and to democracy. And it's very dangerous once you start threading that needle of I choose which side and then I act on which side. I really like democracy because I've seen other places where there's no democracy. It works, and we should cherish it.
What's that saying? Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
Yes.
That's for sure. A functioning democracy, which includes a functioning media, is a very important thing. All right, guys, let's move on to our third and final topic, a much lighter topic. Next week, we have the Apple iPhone event. For me, it's like Christmas Day. Actually, when it comes out, it's Christmas Day. This is kind of like pre-Christmas. And so, we've heard about the new capture button, which is more like a DSLR. You touch it lightly, it'll focus. You press hard, it'll take a photo. There's a rumor that if you swipe left and right, it'll zoom in or switch modes. There's probably going to be, not probably, there's definitely going to be more powerful chips, which there always is. Probably better camera, which there always is. But it doesn't feel to me like there's a massive change in hardware this year. I, for one, am just looking for a freaking USB-C AirPods Max. That's all I want. All I want is AirPods Max with a USB-C plug. What do you guys think about this? Are we excited? Is it more of the same? Are we hoping they're actually going to release Apple Intelligence finally? Where are we at with the Apple iPhone event?
I think they're going to have some version of the Apple Intelligence stuff they previewed. I think that'll be clear and exciting. So I don't know how much of it will be there, but I think it's going to be it's going to be a lot more than they have now, which is almost nothing.
I would like to see the AI, and even if it's a preview mode, I would like to see what it gives developers and what is the ecosystem play here. Because I think Apple has been very good at releasing their own technology, but they've been amazing at creating ecosystem and platforms. And I think if they do their job right here, they could open up a new distribution channel for developers to innovate on a very, very interesting AI platform.
So my thoughts are, well, you said it's a bit like Christmas. And, I think Christmas is one of those things where you start off in your life, if you celebrate Christmas, really excited. You're a kid, you're like, oh, it's Christmas Day, this is fantastic. And then you become an adult and Christmas gets less and less exciting. And that's how I feel about iPhone events. What's this, the iPhone 16? I have trouble caring, especially on the hardware side. I think the changes have been incremental for years now, right? And it's just not very interesting. So straight away, we've talked about AI and so on. Apple announced Apple Intelligence several months ago. They still haven't released most of it. Some of it will perhaps be exclusive to the iPhone 16. But I think even in having this discussion, we've admitted that the hardware is no longer interesting. What might be interesting is some of the unique software capabilities that are exclusive to this hardware. And we'll have to wait and see if that's the case. But I mean, an iPhone 16, like a slightly better camera, a slightly faster chip, slightly more RAM, a slightly brighter screen, I do not care at all, I'm sorry to say.
I do think it's cool these days to say Apple doesn't innovate and it's all incremental and nothing's changed. I have a slightly contrarian view on this. Having really gone deeply down the rabbit hole on product, this idea of deep focus and principles and polish, I have come to really admire the incremental improvement of Apple products that over time really ladder up to something very, very valuable. And if you look at the iPhone, 15 compared to the 13, it is a better device. And if you compare most Apple iPhones to most Android phones, it's a better device. And I don't mean a feature list, I mean using it. Little things like the tap targets are better. When you tap a button, like on Facebook, it actually sticks, it actually goes blue, and it actually locks in. Things, SharePlay actually works. Like, it is just a better world to live in. And I think the incrementalism is the reason for that.
Oh, don't get me wrong, Chris. The iPhone 16 will be the best phone out there. The same way the iPhone 15 is the best phone now, the iPhone 14 was the best phone the year before, and so on. It's just not interesting. We want to talk about interesting things here. Incremental, small product polish improvements are not interesting, right? And they're predictable at this point, I would say. And so, it's like, I remember when the iPhone 4 came out. We're all old enough to remember that. That thing was fucking amazing. I couldn't wait to see one. And when I saw it, it looked like magic. No one feels that way about the iPhone 16. I'm sorry. They just don't.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I just, for the founders listening, I think the idea that doing incremental, boring changes can often ladder up to really powerful net benefit to your customers. More founders need to do boring things on the way to a compelling vision. and they're just kind of trying to skip all the steps. And I think that's an important lesson from Apple. What I'd love to see is, if they're the next categories I'd love to see, which they're not going to announce this event, but foldables without a crease. If Apple could crack the code on that, I think that'd be a revelation. And I think Apple needs to get into smart glasses. Those are the next form factor that matter for me. So I'd love. It's not going to happen this week, but I'd love to see it at some point soon.
I want to see 2 weeks of battery life. I think that is the one thing that will improve my life.
Yes, exactly.
Have you tried, by the way, Amir, have you tried turning off the mobile data and Wi-Fi on your phone? You will get 2 weeks of battery life. All you have to give up is internet.
The reason I'm wearing Wii things and not Apple Watch is a 3 weeks battery life.
Well, that's the reason I wear a Whoop. It just lasts forever, and you can plug it in while wearing it. Have any of you noticed that your phone has stopped lasting the day, by the way?
Yep. In the last 2 months. It's crazy.
In the last 1 or 2 months, right? The pragmatist in me just says, hey, it takes about a year for it to lose that much battery health. Mm-hmm. The conspiracy theorist in me says this is a marketing tactic to drive new phone sales.
I do have one lukewarm take on your point of innovation, is that phones have become very same. There hasn't been much, I hesitate to even use the word innovation, just variety. Like, what's happened to small phones? What's happened to, phones that prioritize battery life? They might be heavier with a bigger battery. Like, all the phones have kind of converged to a single form factor, and it's pretty dull. There's not a lot of consumer choice. So, if anybody could think of a new form factor that optimized for a different set of criteria and do it well, it would be Apple. So I would love to see them do something like that. I don't expect they will, though.
There are a number of niche phones, dumb phones, and digital ink phones that last for weeks and so on, that are designed to help people with digital detox and so on. There's the foldable phones and so on. I do think Apple's interested in the mainstream, and they're interested in perfecting things before they launch them, so they're unlikely to do something more niche there. But I do expect, or at least hope, that in the era of AI, the form factor of the software is going to radically change, less app-like and more conversational or unified. And I do wonder if the hardware can change as well along with it. At the very least, the software experience is going to change dramatically, I think. But there is an opportunity, like the pin, like the necklace, like the glasses. I think we will be talking about materially new, important categories moving forward that either displace the phone or the phone itself evolves. But I'm not really sure what that'll look like. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out. All right, guys. Fun conversation as always. Yaniv, how can people find you on the internet?
So I am on LinkedIn, trying to make it a little bit less of a boring place. I'm still posting while I'm on my extended vacation. My wife's not that happy about it. So make it worth my while. Like my stuff, and I love getting connections from TSP listeners. So if you give me a connection request, tell me you're from TSP, I'll accept it.
By the way, Yaniv, I've heard multiple people say to me, so wait, Yaniv has left you holding the bag? You're trying to hold down the fort by yourself? And I've been throwing you under the bus completely about this.
Smallest violin, my friend.
It's great to have you on the show today.
What a privilege. What a privilege I've given you.
Amir, how about you?
I'll extend the same courtesy. If you find me on Twitter and say that you came to hear about me from this show, I'll accept your friendship connection offer. But you can find me on most social networks, preferably on Blue Sky, and dark mode if you want to talk about investments. Darkmode.vc.
I'm at Emil Michael on X, formerly known as Twitter. Connect with me there.
And you can find me on all the social media at Chris Saad, or on my site, chrissaad.com and chrissaad.com/newsletter. All right, guys, catch you in the next one.
Have a good one. Bye, guys.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.